Fulgrim took his time in answering the summons, but Perturabo had expected that, and his humours were in balance when the layered doors swung open. The robots of the Iron Circle brought their threat sensors to bear, but Perturabo waved them down as Fulgrim swept inside with a tired, pained expression. Perturabo's attention was focused on a clockwork automaton, the working model of a warhound titan that was almost as fully functional as the real thing. Its upper carapace was hinged open, revealing a fiendishly complex latticework of gears, cogs, and timing shafts. The metronomic beat of its mechanical heart tick-tocked to a precise rhythm, and the miniature screwdriver Perturabo held was no thicker than a human hair. Two of the Iron Circle moved aside to allow Fulgrim within, and behind him came two of his captains, Caesseron and Verosian, together with the limping form of his last Lord Commander, Eidolon. Behind them came the Trident, who moved to take position at the cardinal points of a triangle around him. Perturabo gave Forix a slow nod. Fulgrim glanced around and, seeing that little, if anything, had changed from his last visit to Perturabo's sanctum, lost interest in surroundings that would have captivated Terran scholars for months. Fulgrim was clad in his battle armor, bearing a fresh coat of paint that was almost painfully vivid in its coloring. The amethyst and gold were somehow too real, too sharp-edged, as though painted on the surface of his retinas. "Sit," said Perturabo. For a moment he thought Fulgrim would refuse, the command too imperious, too demeaning in the presence of their subordinates. Though he knew it was a childish ploy that a narcissist like Fulgrim would see through in a heartbeat, he ignored his brother and continued working on the Warhound's interior. Just as he judged Fulgrim was about to speak, he said, "I summoned you 5 hours ago." "I'm aware of that," said Fulgrim, tight-lipped and bowstring taut. "But I just lost a warship, so my attention has been somewhat diverted." "You needlessly lost a warship," pointed out Perturabo. "Is that why you summoned me to your tinker's workshop?" snapped Fulgrim. "To berate me for showing a measure of intrepidity? If you have brought me here to gloat or say 'I told you so,' then you can save your breath. I will not apologize for wanting to learn more of those who would oppose us." "And what did you learn?" said Perturabo, finally looking up from his working. "What great revelations do your monsters bring us from so bold an expedition?" Fulgrim said nothing, and cast his gaze around the room, as though the paintings, anatomical diagrams, and mathematical proofs were now of sudden interest to him. His gaze hardened as his eyes alighted on the sketches over Perturabo's shoulder, and he knew exactly what Fulgrim was going to say before he said it. "How did you get those drawings?" "Which ones?" "The gruesome ones," said Fulgrim. "The ones showing what looks like Primarch anatomy. You know how I got them." Fulgrim nodded, and an ugly expression of bitter jealousy clouded his features. "I remember little of the time before our scattering," said Fulgrim with a dismissive shrug. "You remembered enough to pass on something to your fleshsmith." "Fabius?" said Fulgrim. "No, I gave him nothing except permission to explore to the furthest reaches of his knowledge." "Really? You told him nothing?" "Well, I may have pointed him in certain directions," admitted Fulgrim. "But the work he has done is all his own. Admittedly, what he has manufactured so far leaves something to be desired, but no great art is ever achieved without effort and blood." "It is wrong," said Perturabo. "Wrong?" said Fulgrim, as though the word were anathema to him. "Haven't you seen yet? There is no right and wrong. We are beings of will and desire, and only by exercising the former and indulging the latter do we move closer to ultimate perfection. Fabius's imperfect science might be crafting monsters just now, but eventually he will create something godlike." All he will create are bastard hybrids, mongrel half-breeds that shall be strangled at birth, said Perturabo. You should stop what he is doing before it goes any further. I will not, stated Fulgrim. Perturabo sighed and returned his attention to the clockwork model of the warhound. You are never so certain as when you don't know just how wrong you can be, he said, picking up his tools and working on the machine's interior once again. Is it broken? Asked Fulgrim. The perpetual motion driver at its heart is losing time, said Perturabo. I thought that was impossible. On the contrary, said Perturabo, tightening a screw no larger than a grain of sand. A genius of old Earth discovered the theoretical principles thousands of years ago, but he lacked the technology to manufacture a working prototype. I have many of his journals and secret papers in my library, and was able to extrapolate what had been lost to draw up the schematics for Vulcan to build. Fulgrim nodded, already bored. I would have thought Vulcan would have better things to do with his forges, like making guns and swords. Then you don't know him at all, said Perturabo. His love of the forge encompasses all things, from crafting weapons to fashioning miniature wonders of artifice. But that one isn't working, asked Fulgrim. Then he's not as good as I heard. No, it was perfect, said Perturabo. It was damaged during the fighting at Fal. It fell from a shelf, and the mechanism was knocked out of alignment. If you listen closely, you can hear the variation in each cycle of its mechanical heart. Perturabo reached out and placed the warhound on the workbench in front of Fulgrim. I have no interest in your toys, he said. Listen, insisted Perturabo. Fulgrim sighed and leaned in close to the table, turning his head to listen. Perturabo's hand flashed out and gripped Fulgrim's hair. With sudden force, he slammed his brother's face into the warhound. The wondrous automaton shattered into 1,000 pieces as Fulgrim's head crunched into the pitted surface of the workbench. Bone broke and blood spattered. Cogs flew, tiny springs and gear levers spun off. Fulgrim cried out in painful shock, and his captain surged forwards. The iron circle smashed them aside with wrecking ball blows from their energy shields, and before the Emperor's children could recover, the Trident were upon them. Perturabo hauled Fulgrim over the workbench, scattering drawings, fragile tools, schematics, and half-finished sketches. Though Fulgrim was fully armoured, Perturabo lifted him by the neck with no more effort than lifting a mortal man. Fulgrim spat blood, and Perturabo slammed his fist into his brother's face, snapping his head back with a crack of bone. Fulgrim's eyes blazed black, and his face glimmered with reptilian malice. He started to speak, but Perturabo didn't give him the chance. Like a fist fighter going for the kill, he battered his brother's face with pistoning jabs until he had him backed up against an iron column. He pinned Fulgrim in place and drew back his free hand to reach for Forgebreaker. The hammer rose, but Perturabo left the blow hanging. Fulgrim's perfect face was a wet meat wound, leaking blood, snot, and tears. His breath was hoarse and clogged with phlegm and broken teeth. His eyes were swollen shut. He tried to speak, but Perturabo cut him off again. "No, brother," he said. "I am speaking now, and you will listen to me." Falk, Kroger, and Forex hauled Fulgrim's captive officers over. Powerful arms wrapped around their necks and wide-bore pistols jammed in hard to their flesh. "I have bitten my tongue and allowed you to bring my legion into this place," said Perturabo. "I have followed your lead in all things. I have listened to your tall tales and allowed you to set the pace of this expedition." Perturabo leaned forwards and said, "That ends now." He released Fulgrim, who held himself erect in the face of Perturabo's cold anger. "Your warriors have no discipline. Monsters fight your battles, and you have allowed an entire vessel to be sacrificed in the name of vanity. But no more. From here onwards, I am in charge, and for the duration of this mission, your legion is mine to command. Your warriors will obey my orders. They will follow my lead, and they will do nothing except by my command. If you agree to that, then we will continue on into the Eye of Terror and finish this together. If you don't, then I will take my legion and leave you here. Do you understand? Fulgrim nodded and swallowed a mouthful of blood. I understand, brother, he said, his voice a gargled, mangled mockery of its once perfect cadence. I understand that you humble me and expect me to swallow my pride to be your lapdog. I don't need a damn lapdog, snarled Perturabo. I need an equal. But I am not your equal, brother, said Fulgrim, grinning through his bloodied features as though this outburst of violence was somehow amusing. I surpass you in every way. And yet I'm the one holding the hammer, said Perturabo. You say you want an equal, but where is the equality when you secure my assent at the end of a weapon? Perturabo lowered Forgebreaker and harnessed it across his shoulder once again. He turned to the trident and said, Release them. My lord, said Barbenfolk. Caesaron struggled in his grip, despite the pistol wedged under his stretched, open jaws. Are you sure? I'm sure, said Perturabo, because the lesson of history tells me that the best way to get what you want is to make sure you give the other man something too. And what do you give me? Said Fulgrim, coughing a wad of red-flecked saliva. I let you live, said Perturabo. That's not much to give. It's what I'm offering. Take it or leave it. Take it, and no one in the room will ever speak of this. You have my word on that. Fulgrim shrugged, as though the matter was of no consequence. He looked down at Perturabo's chest and smiled with reptilian hunger. I see I have misjudged you, brother, he said. Do you know how long it has been since anyone has caused me real pain? No, of course you don't. But trust me, it's been a while. The swelling around Fulgrim's jaw was already fading. Shattered bones in his cheek and nose and jaw would be knitting, and the bruises around his eyes were yellowing. Primarchs healed fast, but Perturabo was impressed at the speed with which Fulgrim's body was undoing the damage he had suffered. So, do we have an agreement? We do, said Fulgrim, running his hands through his hair and giving his warriors a curt nod. The trident released their charges, but instead of the expected posturing and threats, Fulgrim's captains merely followed the Phoenician as he strode away. Perturabo watched him go, surprised Fulgrim had agreed so readily, but content he had shown his brother that he would not be so casually disobeyed. The encounter with Fulgrim had left him drained, and he let out a shuddering breath, rubbing his hand over his scalp. His eyes were gritty with exhaustion, and he needed a drink. The violent urges of his triarchs were a potent cocktail of combat stims and aggression pheromones, chemical precursors to a fight that hadn't happened. Kroger was disappointed more blood had not been shed, and Folk's fists were still balled in anticipation of killing. Only Forix looked uncomfortable at what had just happened, picking over the smashed remains of the broken warhound. Something troubles you, my triarch? Asked Perturabo. I don't know why, but I've always hated this model, said Forix, though I'm sad to see it destroyed. That's not what I meant, said Perturabo. You think I was wrong to bloody Fulgrim? No. You are a poor liar, Forix. I don't think you were wrong to bloody him, my lord, said Forix. But did you have to humiliate him in front of his warriors? Fulgrim needed to be taught a lesson, said Kroger. That he did, agreed Forrix, lifting a tiny cog-tooth wheel and turning it in a slow circle between his thumb and forefinger. But if you're going to skin a cat, you don't keep it around as a house pet.